Merry Christmas, everybody, and welcome
Yay!
to the Life Plus God podcast. My name is Alyssa Robinson. I'm your host, and that yay you just heard was from Reverend Gracie Millard, one of our associate
Hold
pastors.
it in.
Yes.
I love Christmas.
So we have been on this Advent journey called Christmas Kaleidoscope, where we are seeing all of the little pieces of the story of Christmas come together to create this beautiful story of God's love. And we're getting down to those final pieces. And today we're asking the question, where is hope in the Christmas story? Is there any? So hope is one of those puzzle pieces. It's one of those pieces of the kaleidoscope, and maybe one of the brighter, more dazzling colors within the kaleidoscope. But that's enough of that metaphor. Gracie, I'm so glad that you're here as we head into this joyous time together.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Why do you think hope holds so much value in our faith?
Yeah, I think that hope is something that is tangible for us to put our faith in. It's a clarified, rather than just like hope that in a general hope, but we have a very specific hope that God has made promises to us that God's going to fulfill. And so I think it's really, really important to our faith. And yeah, even though that sounds not very specific, and it isn't, because there's a lot of promises that God has, that we believe God is going to fulfill, but it specifies it that our hope is in God, and that we have something to keep us, to give us purpose, and to give us reason to serve, to worship, and to get through each day. I think, as we'll touch on later.
I know. I think that hope is like the driving force that keeps us moving forward.
Yeah.
Of like faith without hope, belief without hope, anything.
Yeah.
Secular or spiritual.
Exactly.
Without
Yes.
hope goes nowhere.
Right.
Because the hope is looking towards something better is yet to come.
Right.
Things can change. Things can get better. Transformation is possible. Restoration is possible. And from the tiniest thing of like a DIY home project to the biggest thing of spiritual connection to the universe,
Right.
there are elements of hope in
Right.
both of those.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What is the difference between hope and optimism?
I think that's a really good question. Because I think for me, it probably more comes from the connotations of the word versus like the actual definitions. Because when I went to just double check my work, looking at the definitions, optimism had hope in the definition. It was like that the person hopes that everything is working out the way, the best possible way or something. So I guess for me, how I see hope as more of like the actual thing, and optimism is maybe just believing that thing is going to happen, believing that it's there, and maybe hope is having actually maybe experienced a little bit of the light or whatever. So like, I think the classic definition for hope is that light and darkness. So that maybe hope is having caught a glimpse of that light, or even continuing to see that light. And then optimism maybe is just like believing that the light's there, but it's not, like you haven't seen it. So I don't know if that's that might be a very subjective difference to me. Like that's my personal definition of a difference between hope and optimism, but I don't know, others might disagree.
Yeah, it's hard because I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the actual difference is, but then there is, it feels like a big difference to say like, I am hopeful that God will fulfill God's promises versus I am optimistic that God will fulfill God's promises. And I don't know if it's just like our cultural assignments to each of the words. But hope, I feel like we have more invested in it. When I use the word hope, it feels like it's with all of your being. Like,
it comes from like the very core of you.
It's guttural. And then optimism feels like it could just live in the brain.
Right.
But hope goes beyond that. It goes beyond our head knowledge. But yeah, it is. It's something that's really difficult to define, and someone listening might be like, "No, I think they're the same thing." Which maybe they are.
Maybe it is. Yeah.
Why do you think it's important to remind ourselves of hope at especially this time of year at Christmas?
Yeah. Specifically to remind ourselves that we have hope in God at Christmas, or that Christmas is a reminder of the hope we have in God. Because I'm sure I'm not the first one to say that Christmas has become about so many other things. But what Christmas God really intended for that to be about is, look at this tangible hope that I'm giving you, that I am a God who fulfills promises. I'm a God who's coming to be with you, and I'm a God who's changing the world through a baby. I think that's the kind of hope that God wants us to base our whole living out of, versus the hope that we get, a present under the Christmas tree. Or I think it's just easy to forget that we depend on God. And that Christmas reminds us that our hope, all our hope, true hope, is in God.
And I think that one of the things that is interesting about the way that God revealed God's self through this baby is that hope maybe has humble beginnings, and that it's not, maybe hope it's a seed that's planted that grows over time, as opposed to like this triumphal entry and immediate takeover. And so I think that allows that little reminder of, and I don't have kids. I've never had kids. I've only heard stories of like the anticipation of pregnancy and like the actual feeling of having a baby. And so like, I don't want to have kids, but that is something that I don't know if envy is the right word, but it would be for anyone who is a mother. I'm sure Christmas hits them a little bit differently than for those of us who have not literally given birth.
Right.
But there's something in the hope of a new baby, of it allows you to dream for this child, and who are they going to be? And how are they going to function in this world? And I don't know. It's
just expectations.
Yes.
And I like that you're talking about this seed that's being planted, and that it just makes me think of like that hope is not something that's like a fleeting thing, that it's something that God intends to grow over time, and that it's everlasting. It's not a maybe that's where the difference for optimism comes. I don't know, but it's something that's planted and grows and is not, it's something that requires patience.
Well, there's a saying that the wheel of justice turns slowly, and maybe we could say the wheel of hope turns slowly. Because one of the things that Daniel talked about in his episode on forgiveness is, this tapestry of, or let's say kaleidoscope, this kaleidoscope of God's love began 900 years before with the prophet Isaiah.
Right.
And like, maybe that's when the seed of hope was planted.
Right.
And then it's just been growing and growing and growing for almost 1,000 years.
Right.
And then Jesus shows up. Like, it is just kind of incredible how these strands of hope are weaving
Yeah.
throughout this story.
Yeah.
So if we're focusing specifically on the Christmas story of,
Mhm.
the fun part, Mary, Joseph, wise men,
Yeah.
shepherds, angels, all of this, how do you think that each of the characters in the Christmas story, were seeking hope in different ways?
Well, I think probably the easiest one that comes to mind is that the shepherds have this really, well, I guess they, if depending on which gospel you read, they all have encounters with angels of some kind, some divine encounter. But I guess the first one that comes to my mind is that with the shepherds, that they, here they are, these lowly shepherds who are literally working in the night. So if you're working a night shift, you're not working the prime job, and here they are, that they are the ones to receive this news from heavenly hosts coming to them and saying that this is good news for all people, and that the Messiah has been born to you, and that they're the ones who receive this news, that, like you just mentioned before, that this seed that had been planted from 900 years ago, that, like, wait, the Messiah, the one that we've been waiting like 1,000 years for is here, that maybe this is the one who's gonna bring Israel justice, and maybe there will be peace. So maybe I no longer have to worry about things that I was, who knows what their personal worries and daily concerns were, that maybe that this news brought personal hope for, but that the world was changing. I mean,
And these are probably people who really want the world to change.
Yeah.
Like, I imagine extremely
Exactly.
oppressed people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Mary, I can't imagine Mary. I, I was really struggling with this because I was like, I don't know if Mary had much of a choice. I mean, I know it said that God, spoke to her and saw, favor in her, but I mean, she really had no choice but to have hope that God was going to be true to God's promise that, you're not going to abandon me, right? Because I got this baby and I'm not married. And my husband, or my fiance, he could leave me. He has every right to do that. And I'm just a teenager and I don't know what I'm doing. So I think with Mary is that's the only choice she had to make it through, was to have hope that God was not going to abandon her.
So there's already what I'm hearing of just two characters. There's
Yeah.
all of these different emotions around hope of, like, for the shepherds, maybe it was excitement and optimism for, hey, things can change. And
Yeah.
for Mary, it was like, okay, I hope you're right. Like,
Right. Well,
there had to be some anxiety and worry with
Yeah.
of course she had the choice in saying yes, but that's about all she had the choice in, because
Yeah.
everything else is completely out of her
Right.
control. She can't control the way other people react to the
Right.
news that she's
Exactly.
carrying. And so I imagine she probably was just like every person that she shared this with, she doesn't know how they're going to react. And so she has to hold so much hope in this message that the angel delivered to her, that, like, it had to cancel out all of those fears.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
crazy.
Yeah, that it was going to be so much bigger than the pain that she was currently enduring. I think maybe that's something that hope, like, something really big about hope, is that hope is what helps you, is the only thing that can help you endure pain. that the hope is greater than the pain that you're enduring, or that's what you have to hold on to, is that there's something better coming and it's going to be worth it. Gosh, I hope so. So, yeah.
All right. Well, what do you think of Joseph?
Gosh, I think with Joseph, it's something similar to Mary of like, I'm placing hope that God is going to deliver, that this is going to be true. Gosh, I mean, he didn't even, I always feel for Joseph. He has very indirect relationship that he just kind of has to take this in faith and trusting that, again, that this is for the greater good.
Mm-hmm.
And so he has to place hope in God, fulfilling God's promises in Mary and in, oh gosh, in himself, that he's making the right choice. I mean, I can't imagine.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah, it's overwhelming to try to figure out how did he make that choice to say, okay.
Well, and then I also think of the opposite end of the spectrum too, of like, for certain people, hope is very threatening. So like King Herod, which, after King Herod killed a lot of babies because of this hope that was instilled in the people that threatened his power and threatened his rule.
You're right.
And then, I imagine Caesar, we don't really know much about like his reaction to the birth of Jesus, but like I imagine anyone in power hearing news of this hope that's spreading through the lower classes was very threatening to them. Yeah.
Well, I mean, even then later, like when Jesus, so we could maybe infer that like later on, as the Pharisees and a lot of the spiritual leaders were threatened that like, who is this guy that's providing hope for people when like our law has helped us get through so much. But yeah, the story the rumors of this guy, this baby being born, no, we got to squash that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you think that the Christmas story, because hearing all of these different characters, and we didn't really get into the wise men or the magi or whatever, but I think that theirs is kind of a combination of fear and excitement too, of like they make their way to Jesus. They have these gifts. The gifts that they're presenting are gifts for a king. And so it's obvious that they have hope in the future of this baby. But then when they go back a different way out of fear of the people in power, as we mentioned, who probably want to squash that hope.
Right. Yeah. No, that's exactly what I was thinking for the Magi, is that they have this, they're coming at it from a completely non-religious angle of, like that they were not Israelites by any means. They didn't have this like story of,
they haven't been waiting forever like the shepherds and Mary and Joseph would have been. Do we know that the shepherds were Jewish?
I guess we don't necessarily know for sure. Deduction skills make me want to assume that they are.
Well, I guess if the angels appear to them and say, "We have this message for you," we can like make an assumption of like they know something. If we're telling you the Messiah has come, you probably were waiting for a Messiah to come. Right?
And they're like, wait, we don't speak your language. What are you saying?
What does this mean?
Right. So yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
So
reasonable deduction.
All of these characters weaving out of the story, they're each experiencing hope in different ways, carrying different emotions. Does the Christmas story still provide hope for us today? And if it does, how?
Yeah. So I think that it does. I think that
I thought the answer might be that it does.
I'm right. There's maybe a reason that we still celebrate it.
How does it?
That Well, the first thing that came to mind is just like that God can change the world, that God can change the world. And that God can change the world from the bottom, from the lowliest of places, from the most hopeless of circumstances, that God fulfills God's promises. I think that's where we find hope in the Christmas story today, is that it shows us that God is a God who fulfills promises, and that God is the Emmanuel, the God who is with us. And it's not who was with us and like but it's like that God has been with us and will be with us. I think that's where hope comes in for the Christmas story for today. I think hope is something like, it's just this human thing that we need. That's why it translates and has held on. We've held on to it. And this story is so powerful, and why it's touches people year after year, and people keep, even if they, only come twice a year, there's a reason that they do come,
Well, and I also think about, that change can happen and God can use anyone to make that change. I just think it's interesting because, like, I think that not even just culturally, like in humanity, we all want to leave a legacy. We all, want to make a mark on this world. But then we hear about these shepherds one time and then never hear about them again. Like never. And they're such an integral part to this faith story and the beginning of our faith story. And they come into the picture, they're given the news, and then we have no idea what happens to them after this and what kind of lives that they lead. And I think that what's encouraging to me is like, if we're willing to listen to God and be present, all it takes is one moment to participate in God's story and to be a part of it. And it's not even about like my impact or my legacy that I'm leaving, but like a willingness to participate in this kaleidoscope that God is putting together in whatever way. And if it means like I hear a message and I travel to see a baby and that's the end of my story, that's huge.
Right. Or it also makes me think of, with all these characters, they all find out that it's not that there's just one chance for that, to hear about this or to participate in the hope. It's that God is a God of many chances, and that you could have heard about it maybe from the shepherds or like from Mary's cousin Elizabeth. Maybe she told you about it. Like that God never. That hope is something that's always readily available. And like you'd said, that God can use anything or anyone. And so I think that's why this Christmas story is so powerful for people, is that it really comes, whatever pain or situation you're experiencing, you can find some relation to, I don't know, if you're single, or like if you're a teenager, like you can find some point of connection of this, like, oh, but God has made something beautiful, and God plants hope through this circumstance. Why can't it be the same for me? Or that this circumstance means hope for me too. So.
Well, and I think that a key is, we've said a few times, participating, being a part of the story. We get the chance to be a part of this story of hope. And around Christmas time, there is just this overflowing of goodwill. People are looking, and it would be lovely if we did this all year, but
Right.
especially around Christmas, people are looking for ways to serve. They're looking for ways to give. They want to donate. They want to help other people, and I think that it's an example of us being an extension of God's hope for others. So, what are some things that we can do to be a source of Christ's hope for others?
So I was trying to think of some profound thing to say for this, but what came to mind was that, and maybe Daniel had alluded to this from the prophecy in Isaiah that Jesus later proclaims for himself, saying that he is the fulfillment of this prophecy. That's in Isaiah 61, that Jesus says, "The Spirit of God is upon me, that I have come to bring good news to the oppressed, bind up the brokenhearted, proclaim liberty to the captives, release the prisoners, to comfort those who mourn and provide for those who mourn." I think that's just that's your list of ways to provide hope, to do the things that Jesus Christ did. So bring good news to the oppressed. I don't know how you want to interpret how you can do that. I don't know if that's, taking on a family's bills, or I'm really bad at brainstorming right now, but just looking at that list in Isaiah 61, those are the things that Jesus says he is the fulfillment of, and as followers of Christ, we're claiming to do those things too. And so that is Jesus's embodiment of hope. That's how Jesus is the living hope, the embodiment of hope, because Jesus brings good news to the poor and releases the captives and comforts those who are brokenhearted.
Yeah. And I think that part of that is to experience this hope and to be a part of this hope. We have to open our eyes to what's happening around us, because it is so easy to get caught up, especially this last week counting down to Christmas. Have I gotten all the presents? Have I wrapped everything? Have I made sure everybody knows the plan for Christmas dinner,
Right.
and all of this stuff, to forget to look for who is oppressed around me, who is mourning, who is grieving, who is really struggling during this time, and how can I be of service to them? And I think that if maybe the only thing that you do to be a source of hope is to open your eyes and see who needs some hope,
Yeah.
then that's a good first step.
Exactly. Yeah, you need that step in order to maybe next year take the next.
Yeah.
And I think also I just go back to Emmanuel, the being the God with us, and just so being a presence in whatever way you can for somebody, that's a source of hope for people, that they're not alone in some whatever way. You can't ever really fix people's problems. That's something I've learned in ministry. It's like you can't fix people's problems, and it's so frustrating because you want to. And just as a follower of Christ, you want people to, you want to help people. And there's a lot of times you just can't really provide the tangible help that they need, but just being a presence for people provides a lot of hope, I think.
So how have you personally experienced God's hope at work in your life? Are there some examples that you can give us that kind of help us frame what this experience of God's hope means?
Yes. So I have a couple, and one of which I don't know if you might want to not use, because it's just kind of touchy right now.
I am intrigued.
Well, yeah. Okay. Well, the first one that I can kind of think of is the first time I felt like truly hopeless was like the beginning of the pandemic, when we had just no answers about anything, about how long this was lasting, how lethal, how long this would go on. That was when the first time I experienced feeling truly hopeless of I don't feel like I can trust anything about the future. I have no idea what the future is going to look like. And it didn't happen overnight, but it's just slowly was reminded of all the people, for some reason, not thinking of all the people in the world presently, but like throughout history who have endured wars and famines and just horrible things, diseases, long-lasting diseases, just all these terrible things, and that they somehow managed to get through, and that they held on to stories of hope, especially the story of hope. And then thinking about, and then I was like, oh yeah, and the actual people in the stories of hope, like that we read about all the time, and that you're getting your degree in.
Right, because you were in seminary during the pandemic.
Yeah. And so thinking about that, God is that this God that I am praying to is the God of Jacob, whose family was reunited, and the God of Moses, who delivered Israel from slavery, and that this is the God of hope, who came to earth and to be with us and to show us love and to show us how to love, and that this is a God who fulfills promises. And even if I don't know how it's going to look, maybe I no longer can tangibly put my can picture things, can picture the future or how my future might look, I'm gonna put my hope in God, and that the greater story is being told, and that it'll be not that the pain will be worth it, or that that the pain is part of God's plan at all, but that I have something to hold on to, that this is a God who has not abandoned me.
And when you describe that, it's there. I don't know if there's a word for it, but there's this strange feeling sometimes in those moments when you were talking about looking back in history and everything that humanity has overcome at different times in history, that you feel so small, and yet at the same time, God is with you, and you feel significant
very
and seen.
Comforted.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so it's these opposite things of like, how do I feel so insignificant and yet so seen at the same time?
I don't know if there's a word for that, because I feel that all the time.
I know. And I have had that moment of like, when I see images from the Webb telescope of the universe, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like my life doesn't matter at all. And yet
I feel so loved.
I feel so loved and comforted by like the magnitude of the universe.
Yes.
And
I don't know the word for it.
It's a weird feeling.
Yeah. It's definitely that. That's exactly what.
Yeah, and I think hope is a part of it. Like it's the reason you can feel that way is because of this greater story of hope that's unfolding. But I don't know.
Yeah. Well, just for sake of probably curiosity, that the other one is just like here I am entering my like vocational career in ministry, when the future of the church looks uncertain, and not even just our denomination, but like the church just looks so different, and probably will be very different by the time my career ends, whenever it does, whatever. And that scares me a lot
Mhm.
because I don't know what it will look like. And so I'm having to put hope that God that God's promises are bigger than my what I'm able to picture. And that the way that we do the work of God, it doesn't I was gonna say it doesn't matter, but like that the way that Paul did the early church, Paul couldn't have imagined this is how it looked, but the work of God was still getting done. So I'm trying to not let the limitations of my understanding of how God's work can get done.
Well, I think it's a good reminder, especially, I mean, this time of year when, like you said, some people only go to church twice a year, and this is one of the times they choose to come.
Mhm.
And so it is an important reminder that our hope is not in church.
Mhm.
Our
Yeah,
hope is
yeah.
not in the denomination.
Exactly.
Our hope is not in the church leaders. Our
Uh-huh.
hope is in God.
Right.
And we can only each
Yes.
do our best to follow the path that God has put in front of us.
Right. And just
but
be faithful.
I think it
Right.
is like, I don't think that that's really a touchy subject because I think that we're all feeling a little,
Yeah.
you probably more so because like you said, this is your vocation. This is what you have chosen to dedicate your life to. So I understand. And
Yeah.
there is, you're in the Mary position of like, there is hope that God will do what God promised, but also you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know
Right.
how people are going to react. You have no control over decisions that people are making
Mhm.
somewhere else that will in turn affect
Mhm.
your choice to become a pastor.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I do think that it is that reminder that like we put our hope in God,
Mhm.
and the church can be helpful, but
Yes.
the church can also be a hindrance,
Right.
and can distract us
Yes.
from where our hope should be.
Right.
Yeah.
Despite our best intentions.
Yeah.
But no, thank you for putting words to that word vomit of maybe it's probably because I'm still processing it. But yeah, that God that my hope is in God, and that is the one thing that is God is not a thing, but that God is the one well, lack of a better word, the one thing that we can put our hope in.
Well, so how because I think that we all need those reminders of like there is hope. And we've all had that feeling that you mentioned. For you, it was at the beginning of the pandemic. For me, it was in the midst of my divorce. That feeling of hopelessness, of like, I don't see a future. I don't see what my life looks like. I think that everyone has an experience of that. And if you haven't had that experience yet, you will sometime, eventually. Like you'll feel that sometime. So what are some practical things that we can do to hold on to hope?
This is going to be a really basic pastor answer, but reading scripture. I mean, it contains words of hope. It contains words of hope in the midst of war and famine and imperial rule and uncertainty. Reading Psalms, maybe it would be a really helpful way to hold on to hope. Reading like that Isaiah 61 is a great one. Isaiah 9. And the Gospels themselves. So I think that's the number one place to start is reading scripture, or reading other words of faith from other thought leaders. And I mean, I always go to Richard Rohr. He's my go-to. And then other ways to remind yourself of hope is to be the source of hope, or to be an instrument of hope, I guess. So by giving, by being present, by opening your eyes to the world around you and seeing what is God calling you to do? How is God calling you to provide hope, or to be the instrument of hope? To do all those things that Jesus embodied and calls us to do.
Well, and I also sometimes wonder, like, are there things I should not be doing that won't help me hang on to hope? Because, like, I'll tell you, one of the things for me is the news. Like, I cannot
It's really
regularly consume the news and be hopeful.
Yeah.
And it's not because I don't think that the news is an accurate reflection all the time of what's happening in our community, because a lot of it is crime driven. A lot of it is, the story is the darkness that we see surrounding us. But if I were to stop watching the news entirely and just depend on the interactions that I have with people throughout the community, then it would bring me so much more hope for humanity. And so I think that it's also thinking about things like, and that's for me personally, that might not be the same for someone else. Maybe they can watch the news.
I think that's pretty safe.
Well, but I think that thinking about the things that leave you feeling depleted and kind of take away your joy, I think that there might be a list of things to avoid.
Yeah.
So that we have the capacity to continue to be a people of hope.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of distractions from hope or false senses of hope. Yeah. I think that's true.
Well, because I'm naturally a pessimist. So I think the worst. Too. Yeah. Like, I think the worst of every situation. And not necessarily that I think, like, we're all going to hell in a handbasket.
No,
it's not that, but I'm just like, I don't necessarily expect people to be at their best. Because I know I'm not always at my best.
Right.
And I go immediately to dark thinking. So why would I think that everyone else is at their best?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And so, then you meet people and you're like, oh my gosh, how are you the way that you are? Like, I have so much hope for the world now that I've met, when you can meet a real person who is doing good or something, like you're saying. So going out and having conversations with people in your community that you're like, oh, you do exist.
Yeah. There's goodness in the world.
Exactly.
Karen Kraska. She's the one for me that it's like, you cannot bring that woman down. Like, she is so happy and hopeful and optimistic at all times. Any bad news you give her, she will find the hope in it. And just surrounding yourself with those people who can see hope in the world, I think it is contagious.
Another thing is going back to gratitude, that looking for the things that you're grateful for. And I know that's corny and something we just had Thanksgiving, but
yeah, we did Thanksgiving. We're done being grateful.
Yeah,
now it's about what I want.
Exactly. But I think those can be helpful things for being like, oh yeah, like, I'm not completely abandoned because I still have my health, or I have family or whatever. So that could be another thing.
Here is the one question I'm asking everybody.
Okay.
What is your favorite kaleidoscope moment revealed in the Christmas story? And I have defined a kaleidoscope moment as a unique piece of the story that when you see the big picture, it reveals God's magnificent plan or love.
My favorite? I think it's the way and who God chose to use in Mary in that this birth of this Savior was going to come from this teenage girl who wasn't married yet and would be a refugee. And so she's a single teenage mom, technically. She has her live-in fiance, and that's who the hope of the world is going to come through. To me, that tells me everything about who God cares about who God wants us to look out for, and who God doesn't forget. That if it can come from the very last person that anybody would say the Savior of the world should come through, that's the one person God's going to use. Yeah.
The end.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Gracie, for joining me for another episode.
Thanks
and we'll see you
for
again
having
soon.
me.
And Merry Christmas to you, and Merry Christmas
Merry
to everyone.
Christmas.
We do have Christmas Eve worship times that you can go to tmumc.org/Christmas, and we've got some candlelight services happening on Christmas Eve at 5 p.m. and 7 p.m. We have an earlier in the morning service for families, and it's for like kids and teens, and it's at 11 a.m. And so everything you need to know about worshiping with us at Christmas is at tmumc.org/Christmas. And I hope you'll join us to experience this hope that God has to offer. God with us.
Yes. Amen.
The Life Plus God podcast is hosted, written, and produced by me, Alyssa Robinson, and sponsored by Treach Memorial United Methodist Church in Flower Mound, Texas. If you live in the Flower Mound area, I invite you to stop by and see if Treach could be your new church family. You can learn more about all of our programs and events at tmumc.org, and I hope to catch you next week for our next episode of the Life Plus God podcast.